time? Okay. Go.
Thank you. Wonderful. So I wanted to begin just by welcoming everyone. Thank you so much for coming today, this afternoon, and a special thanks to our distinguished speakers. Thank you to Peter Katzenstein for chairing and organizing and bringing us all together to discuss and learn around the Polish national elections. And a very warm and heartfelt thanks to the Institute for European Studies, particularly Mabel Berezin, the program director, and Patricia Young, the program manager, for bringing us here around this important topic. I'm Rachel Beatty-Riedel. I'm the director of the Einaudi Center for International Studies. And I just wanted to put this in context in terms of what we're discussing here today. The Institute for European Centers thematic research challenge around democracy in Europe and beyond, and how it ties into our Einaudi Center's democratic challenges and resistance, in the way in which it's a research priority area for the Center for International Studies that crosses Europe, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and North America, to be sure. So I would just wanted to suggest how important this theme is for us today and the way in which we can learn from the Polish case, hopefully offering us some bright spots around the ability for democratic oppositions to come together, around electoral coalitions, social mobilization, and also the work yet to be done in terms of when you have those electoral gains, the ways in which institutions remain to be re-democratized from within, and the ways in which democracy is a continual challenge for rights and representation, participation. And so in this way, I think it's really an honor for us to have you here, an opportunity for us to learn and to connect more globally. So thank you very much. Next, I'm just going to pass the mic briefly to Mabel Berezin to kick us off.
Okay. We're not going to say much because we want to hear you. But again, I'm Mabel Berezin, the director of the center. I want to welcome everyone. And we are really excited at the opportunity to have you come here right after the election to hear about it. It's obviously a surprise, and it fits into the landscape of Western Europe or Europe writ large. And, you know, for those of you who don't follow all of European politics, a month after, I'm sure if it was a month after this happened in Denmark, in the Netherlands, we had Geert Wilders, who was the right-wing candidate, who was sort of dropped off the scene in around 2017, although right-wing politicians never totally drop off the scene, and suddenly he won the election somewhere before Thanksgiving, which was got in the way of my looking at every poll that happened about it. Anyway, we're excited for the discussion today, and I'm going to turn it over to Peter Katzenstein. I'd like to welcome you both to the seminar.
Thank you. Thank you, Mabel. I thought Mabel was going to be able to pronounce the last name.
Oh, I will, because I worked hard on that. We have Anna Wojciuk.
Yes.
And Maciej Kisilowski.
Oh, wow.
Thank
So now with that out of the way, I can call it Anna and Maciej. So it makes it much easier. So Anna was here in 2016, we just discovered, for a semester, which is when she taught me the ins and outs of French social theory while I was writing a book on power. And we had hot chocolate and cookies, right? Once a week or twice a week. It was delightful. This was before COVID. Anna has become an associate professor at the University of Warsaw. She looks at power and impact of polarization, very much like Ken and Rachel. She got a doctorate from the University of Warsaw, and she was a visiting fellow here, but also at Harvard and Columbia, and a Bodell fellow at the EUI, the European Institute. Lots of articles, including in the Chinese Journal of International Affairs. I remember that one. And she writes op-ed pages in various public journals like Politico, among other things, and Haaretz. So that's Anna. Maciej I haven't met until right now. He has a long string of degrees, a law degree from Yale Law School, an MPA in economics and public policy from the Woodrow Wilson School, MBA with distinction from INSEAD, and a PhD and MA from Warsaw University. He is, a constitutional legal scholar, and as a political scientist. And they teamed up and edited a bestseller. Anna described this project to me when I was in Warsaw some years ago. And it is, in its 4th edition. And you wouldn't believe it, it's a constitutional primer, basically. And how do you create more democracy in an authoritarian system, which now turns out to be in the process of trying to re-engineer itself? And I think in their remarks they will refer to this to some extent. I think the cover is wonderful, very gripping, and apparently there's also 5 or 7 literary things there, but it's a bestseller in Poland now, so we're eager to hear. It's a ray of light for us in a dark basement in Warsaw, right?
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you all for inviting us here, for organizing it so perfectly and smoothly, and for all of you for coming. Before we get to the book and to the project, I would like to give you some basic information about the elections we've just had. And okay, so maybe I try with this one.
I think it's just out of sync. And then,
Okay, yes, fantastic. So I'd like, first of all, to give you some basic information about law and justice, and its 2 terms in power. It was in power from 2005 and 2007, and then it has been in power since 2015 because it hasn't yet gave power to the opposition, even though it lost it. But we are hopeful that the transition will happen shortly. So first of all, they overtook constitutional court in less than a year. All this independent institution has fallen completely, and until now they took control over 20% of the judiciary, which shows you the extent of the challenge which a new government is facing. It's controlling the prosecution service fully. It has been controlling public service broadcasters with a type of propaganda which you can only compare to Russia today. During the pre-electoral debate in public TV, I was hosting a journalist from Switzerland who came to Poland to report. And we were watching together this debate, even though she didn't understand Polish. The fact how it was all arranged, organized, that actually the journalists were talking more than the candidates. How long the questions were. These were basically questions, closed questions with theses. For her, it was a discovery that there could be this kind of media in Europe and not in Russia, but in the EU. So it's really very few people imagine how bad it has been, because it's like that until now. It hasn't yet changed. So they control all state-owned enterprises, obviously. They started founding like things like chaebols, expanding those state-owned enterprises and use them to, for example, buy media. So most of the local media has been purchased by state-owned companies, which is also has been used to spread this propaganda. And we learned that in 2019, they were re-elected after using the spying software, Pegasus. And it's clear that they were spying on the leader of the campaign of the opposition. So these are the Watergate is nothing. Like they did something much more serious, because Watergate was only an attempt, yes, and here they did it systematically, and we don't yet even know how far it went. And also, watching so many bad things happening all over the world, sometimes we don't know about the victims of this regime. So we would like to bring them here. So first of all, was Paweł Adamowicz, the mayor of Gdańsk, who was killed by a radicalized right-wing person during a public appearance. Second one is Mikołaj Felix, a teenage son of an opposition MP member who was so viciously attacked in public media because he was an LGBT person and previously he was sexually abused, and this crime was made public by public TV. He committed suicide because of that. So there were women dying of pregnancy complications after the barbaric decision of the illegal constitutional court to ban abortion. There were many LGBT persons driven to suicide by methodical dehumanization by the government. This was done in the public media. And there were at least 30 refugees who died at the Polish-Belarusian border as a result of the government disregarding the Geneva Convention. If you are interested in that, there is a great movie by Agnieszka Holland about this problem. So there is also a good kind of piece of culture which shows this dramatic situation. And there were at least 34 victims of lethal policy brutality. Police brutality. And there were victims of torture reported in Polish prisons. And of course, there was harassment of principal judges, prosecutors, and opposition members, and also members of civil society. So to give you a better overview of what has been happening in Poland for last 8 years. And here I would like to show you a short video from the campaign, but these are quite drastic images. So if you are sensitive, you may leave for 2 minutes. Yes, it's here. So this is from the electoral campaign. This is their electoral spot, which was on air in public TV, on the internet. So this is just one of many instances of very brutal propaganda, which was used by the Law and Justice government. And we had those elections. Most experts did not expect the opposition to win. In the polls were showing that the Law and Justice is likely to get a far better result. Actually, Maciej, who is in this room, was one of the very few experts, was constantly saying the opposite, that the opposition will win. But it was really very few people who thought it would be possible. We can later discuss why. These are the results. So Law and Justice has 194 seats in a main chamber of Polish Parliament, and the black ones is Confederation. This is far right with a libertarian and nationalist wings, and then you have three democratic parties. Civic Platform is in blue. You have People's Party plus Christian Democrat in 65 seats and 26 the left. So here you can see the share of the votes they got. So Law and Justice still got almost 36%, but they are unable to form a majority. So they still claim they won, but they can't have majority because all democratic parties said they will never have a coalition with Law and Justice. And the Confederation, which was very ambiguous about that, but it was basically denying this possibility, is too small. So this is a very lucky situation for Polish democracy that Peace and Confederation do not have majority. And I think this slide is critical to understand what has happened. So comparing 2019 to 2023, these are millions of votes. So in 2019, there were around 18 million people who voted in the elections. And in 2023, there were almost 22 million. This was the highest turnout in Polish history. Not starting from 1989 when we transitioned to democracy, but ever. Even after we got independence in 1918, there has never been this level of turnout. So this is really record high, and you can see that Law and Justice still gets almost the same number of votes. It decreased very slightly. And in those 4 years, because of COVID and the general aging of the society, the number of people who can vote got shrink by 0.8 million. So, and these are, because you will see later that Law and Justice has a lot of support among elderly people. So they lost a lot of supporters just because they died, but they didn't lose support as such. So this victory was possible because of huge, enormous and unexpected mobilization of the new voters, of people who never voted, and of young people who, because we have a demographic crisis who are very small cohorts, but they got very strongly mobilized. So this was the mechanism that actually Law and Justice kept what it had, but there was a lot of new mobilization going on in the society, which allowed this mostly unexpected victory of the opposition. So here you can see the turnout by age, and the lower line is 2019. So especially among the youngest voters, between 18 and 29 years old, you see this huge increase in turnout. And among the oldest voters, 60 plus, you see the same turnout. So these are younger voters who decided the elections. And later we will discuss how it happened, how it was possible. Yes.
You notice a very, very large turnout difference in 50 to 59 as well. What do you think of that?
Yes, yes, but let me show you that, especially yes, among those voters who are 60 plus, Law and Justice has more than a half of voters is voting for them. So they are really hegemons among the oldest voters, and in all younger cohorts, their support is less strong. So, and among the youngest voters, you see they have barely barely any support. It's less than 15%. And this 16% for Konfederacja, which is this far-right party in black. This is quite typical for Poland. We've always had young voters voting for libertarian parties. So it's mostly this libertarian angle of Konfederacja, which is attracting the youngest voters. So basically, huge mobilization among relatively small cohorts of young people. This was crucial for the democratic victory. And among women, you can see here you can see women versus men. You can see Law and Justice losing some support among women, yes, from 43 to 36, but it's still quite strong among women. And among men, you can see exactly the same trend, yes? So it's not that women are voting predominantly for the opposition, but as you will see later, these are predominantly older women who are the electorate of Law and Justice. Older conservative women are very strong bastion of Law and Justice in their electorate. So here you can see villages, smaller cities and large cities, and you can see that even in the countryside, Law and Justice lost significant support. But and especially in those middle-sized cities, Civic Platform and the People's Party clearly gained. And in large cities, they were never popular. They kept it, and the remaining share of votes, it's distributed between democratic parties. So if you see in professional groups, farmers, yes, among farmers, they haven't lost anything. Yes, so farmers are the bastion of Law and Justice. So more than 2/3 of farmers were voting for them in 2019, and this time this repeated. But if you compare to entrepreneurs, here they lost significantly, especially smaller entrepreneurs who in the past were supporting Law and Justice because of some tax reforms, were very unhappy with this government, and this resulted in less support. If you again look at pension years, yes, here it still stays very high support for Law and Justice from pension years, just dropped slightly by 3% or less. But among students, where in 2019, Konfederacja and Law and Justice had 40% of support, this time they had 25. Yes, this is significantly less. So you can see young people becoming progressive and not voting for right-wing parties. And key reasons why we won, why that was possible. So unlike many experts, I emphasize the role of the US. The EU is, I think, less important. I don't know if you're aware of how important Ambassador Marek Brzeziński was in preserving Polish democracy. So he it's so clear that in 2021, in December, Law and Justice wanted to overtake the main private opposition TV channel, which it's a rich one, it has a lot of resources, big audience, and they basically wanted to overtake it. And this went through the parliament, even though Law and Justice knew that war is going to start in Ukraine, because the CIA director visited them in November and told them that there's war coming. And this TV belongs to the United States. It's Warner Bros. belongs to Warner Bros. Corporation. They did this move against the US Capitol and against freedom of media. It went through the parliament, and the last veto point was the president. And we all know that this was Marek Brzeziński who told the president, you don't do it. And he vetoed it. So it was really that close. I'm 100% sure that without this TVN channel, Polish opposition would not be able to win. And Marek Brzeziński intervened also in other moments, blocking some most dangerous things which Law and Justice wanted to do. He was efficient, but if Trump was a president, things could go differently. Yes, things could. So we were lucky that Biden was in office and that Brzeziński intervened. The EU, yes, to some extent, it made the process more difficult, but I would not say that the EU was critical. Marek Brzeziński and Biden administration were critical for really leaving some informal checks and balances. Maciej even once said that Marek Brzeziński has a particular informal constitutional role in Poland, which we could write a book about or a paper. That it's unbelievable, but without that, it would not be possible. So clearly, COVID-related economic and political crisis made everything much more difficult for Law and Justice. So first of all, they needed COVID recovery fund from the EU. They wanted this extra money, and without COVID, there would not be this money, and there would not be conditionality discussed in Brussels, conditionality for which they agreed, and which then made all their policies more difficult. So very important economic impact of COVID and political impact, because during COVID, they wanted to do presidential elections conducted completely unconstitutionally. And in this process, they lost majority. For half a year, they did not have majority in the parliament, which significantly slowed down this whole process of capturing the state and made all the game complicated. But clearly without COVID, this would not happen. So another contingent factor which made the conditions, which kept the conditions which would allow the opposition to win. Yes, so this was very important. The context which we had and which doesn't exist in Hungary anymore. Yes, so these are differences. Then the democratic opposition adopted very clever strategies. And first of all, Donald Tusk and his leadership was critical. And especially this is Maciej's argument that leaders who have been in power previously, who for the voters are, for them, it's easy to imagine that this person is in power, that this person could have this agency, that it's imaginable, because in this the state which is captured by everything, sometimes by the ruling party, sometimes it's even hard to imagine that someone else could be in power. So Donald Tusk and his very strong leadership, and he did really huge work, having hundreds of meetings with the citizens in all regions of Poland in order to work around public media, which were spreading very brutal, very drastic propaganda against Tusk. We don't have time, but there are amazing stories about how they were presenting Donald Tusk. Sometimes they were even presenting him as a devil in the main news channel, in the news program at 7:30 p.m. A devil, Tusk. This is really unthinkable, and it's hard to believe that something like that is happening. So also there was a huge responsibility on the side of 4 opposition forces, democratic opposition forces, that they managed at some point to stop competing and started cooperation. This was very important because for a long time, Polish democratic opposition was in a very vicious competition, and this didn't work well. But at some point, it seems they understood that if they keep competing, they are going to lose. And this cooperation worked very well. And it works very well now as well in this long period of transition where Law and Justice doesn't want to give back power to the opposition, but they seem to wait and see if the opposition will start to quarrel, but it's not happening. They are very united, and even though there is no one list on which they went to the elections, they on the three lists they are very strongly coordinating and cooperating. And there was an unprecedented mobilization of civil society. There were dozens of amazing campaigns. A lot of business people collected money for the Polish conditions. They collected a lot of money. In Poland, you cannot easily support political parties, but you can support pro-turnout campaigns. So we know that they collected at least $1.52 million for these kinds of campaigns. Maybe it's more, but for that sum, I'm quite sure. And this was invested in a wide variety of campaigns, especially addressed to women. And they were really spectacular ones, and some of them were coordinated by people who know very well social media. And this clearly produced a spillover effect because there were like challenges, you name 10 women who will say why they are going to vote. And they don't say for whom they will vote, but I was surprised because these were like women who teach how to do makeup, the ladies who are teaching how to do fitness. These kinds of people were involved in a campaign because this challenge was every person, it started with just a number of women and they were naming 10 others who were to say why they are going to vote. And this had huge reach. I know that it reached out 400 million people. So Poland is 37 million. So you can see that it really went through many people, so many of those campaigns. So the reach was around 100 million. And then the government made the mistakes. But authoritarian populists usually do that. So I will not focus on them. Let's focus on the side of democratic opposition.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and having us. So Donald Tusk, the good Donald of the world politics, former Prime Minister of Poland from 2007 to 2014, and then the chair, the president of the European Council, and finally the chairman of the European People's Party, which is a center-right coalition, federation, and also a faction in the European Parliament, who made this incredible decision, unlikely decision in 2021 to resign his chairmanship of the European People's Party and come back to Poland, to the trenches, to fight this fight. On June the 4th, the anniversary of the first partly free election in 1989, he managed to gather 500,000 people in Warsaw. And in his speech, he outlined a 4-step strategy. The first step was victory, yes, and we will see, it's not quite complete, that step. We are hoping that the opposition and the president that Anna mentioned, who is a law and justice ally, is slowing things down. There are significant risks. It's an authoritarian turnover of power, authoritarian regime change de facto, not fully consolidated, as Anna mentioned, but highly advanced. If you want to know about for what can still go wrong, very wrong, I wrote a piece at Verfassungsblog, which is a constitutional law European blog. You can easily Google it and see what can go wrong. But if things go right on the 12th of, on the 13th of December, Donald Tusk will become the prime minister, and he will move on with his four-step plan. And the second stage of his plan is pretty ominous, because he made it clear that his second step would be reckoning with evil. And the third that follows would be restitution to the victims. And Anna mentioned some of the victims, yes? Now, an interesting thing is that in this very same speech, in this very same plan, he said that reckoning and restitution is essential and must happen. But the ultimate goal is reconciliation among Poles, and that's his fourth step. And that, of course, presents an age-long dilemma about transitional justice. There is vast literature on this topic. What should we do in situations like that? Yes, and the question is, on which I will focus in relation to our book, does Donald Tusk really want to have it both ways at the same time? Is it really possible to put together a plan that has those two paths in a one program? Yes. Now we need to also mention that there is, especially in practice of politics, post-authoritarian politics, there has been the third way, turning the page. Let's disregard, let's forget, not quite forgive, but just let's move on. That has been quite popular, maybe less in the literature, but very much in practice. This is not on the table partly because this same Donald Tusk committed himself to this strategy in 2007 after the first peace stint in power, and that didn't go well for Poland. Yes, so in 2007, Tusk simply moved on. There were no trials, there was not even reconciliation either, he just moved on. That path is in many ways discredited, and the whole four-stage plan is in many ways Tusk's attempts to correct his error from 2007. Now, I would also point out that when we talk about reckoning, clearly, especially with the help of your country's example post-2020, we are also seeing two distinct sub-strategies of reckoning, which is a quick reckoning and a slow reckoning. Well, your country went for the latter. Yes, we have 3 years down the road, and I guess the Donald Trump's trial are still to begin, or I stopped following. It's a very drip reckoning, yes? Now, let me be very clear, and that was in another speech, not in this speech, but in another widely publicized speech, Donald Tusk made it clear where his heart is, and that's with quick reckoning. He actually made a very oft-quoted remark, which is repeated time and again, that his goal to come back to power is, and I quote, to clean up with an iron broom. So that is basically the plan of the government. Now, at the same time as he was promising iron broom, this volume came out. It's a collective work of a very unusual collective of people, 28 authors who are public intellectuals, but really coming from all across the spectrum. And I mean, including very vocal law and justice supporters who are our co-authors in this volume. It went out in May, exactly around the Iron Broom speech, and it outlines a pretty comprehensive proposal for a democratic constitutional change that at least all those 28 authors, including law and justice supporters, senior advisors, all agree on, while not agreeing certainly on almost any other things. I barely can sometimes tolerate some things that my co-authors in this book speak in public, but we do agree on a certain diagnosis, what needs to be done to make the fourth step of Donald Tusk's plan a reality. And it comes with a diagnosis, yes? It comes with the diagnosis of yet another dimension of Polish polarization that Anna has on purpose did not mention yet, which is a regional dimension. What I'm going to show you is a map of Poland and Polish electoral districts since the 1990s. And what we will show you is how various regions differ from the trend of a given electoral cycle on a main question of whether Polish politics should be kind of more like Western Europe or should be something else. Yes, so we can call it progressives and conservatives, but we're talking about a multi-party system. So we coded parties basically based on this civilizational outlook, like whether we should, the more the blue a given region is, the more the better result is of these pro-European, progressive, liberal or leftist parties. The more red it is, the more it's conservative, nationalist, Eurosceptic. Okay, so let's take a look at this trend. So this is 1993, yes? And after 1993, the next thing that comes is actually not on our slide. It's not another parliamentary vote, but it's a constitutional referendum of the current Polish constitution. Yes, the Polish constitution was passed by a predominantly progressive pro-European parliament. So the red districts are the ones who are against the constitutions, the blue ones are for the constitution. The Catholic Church, for example, called this constitution as a document that provokes serious moral objections at that time, at the time of the referendum. The Solidarity Labor Union, which is by the late 90s representing more of the nationalist strain of Polish politics, actually compare it to a Soviet invasion. So this constitution was never accepted by this red Poland. Yes, and then we have elections are going on, we are joining the EU. The end of history, supposedly the history has ended, but what has not ended is that this polarization is not getting weaker, it's getting more and more pronounced. So basically, regionally, geographically, we have two Polands, yes? We have this more progressive and pro-European northwest of the country, and we have this highly conservative southeast. And by the way, those differences, these maps underestimate those differences because obviously in a multi-party system, parties are smart. So a Tusk party, Liberal Party, would put a very conservative candidates in the southeast and vice versa. So the real latent kind of demand side differences are much deeper than those results. Yeah. So, how does the 1997 Constitution deal with it? Well, if you look at European countries of Polish size, 38 million, medium to large European country, you would probably see France as the only as politically centralized country in Europe as Poland, of that size, yes? It's a very much a winner-takes-all system. Yes, it's a system in which subnational governments do a lot of things, but they cannot say how to do those things. Yes. So for those of you who look at, comparative indices of decentralization, you may say Poland is fine, but they are averages of both this political aspect of decentralization and the executive aspect. And Poland is quite decentralized on the executive aspect. But we often compare the subnational governments to the, to the worker who is digging, a hole in the ground, and all the ministers in Warsaw are looking around that person, telling him how to dig the hole. Yes, that's Poland, and that creates a distinct binary choice. Yes, what Anna mentioned as our success is a mirror image of what PiS, the slightly inelegantly sounding in English abbreviation of Law and Justice, PIS, is in Polish, would need to do in 4 years or 8 years to win, which is we need to mobilize. We need to create a package, the blue package or the red package, in order to eke out a small majority in the parliament, because that gives you full political power. Yes, so that's what we did. We will have the majority in a 460 MP body. We will have a majority of a dozen, a little more of a dozen. And Law and Justice had similar majorities over the last 4 years. Yes, so this book, which, believe it or not, as Peter mentioned, became a bestseller, an edited book about constitutionalism. I don't know many cases of this, but I think it became a bestseller. It sold its first print on the first day when it came out, I think because it responds to the latent feeling of a lot of Poles that something is wrong with this system. Yes? And our solution is in many ways a classic proposal to deal with those things, which is to decentralize. Yes, to move to a system in which the power will be shared between these two political movements. Now, I hope you are already starting to worry about that proposal because it's very controversial, because, of course, the political movement with whom we want to share power is the one that Anna has described in pretty graphic details, yes? So I hope we will have a lively discussion about whether we are crazy or misguided or somewhere in between. But before we do it, I want to give you a taste of an institutional setup. I can't describe a 400-page book in the remaining 10 minutes, but I can give you a taste. And the main, I think, institutional illustration of the philosophy in this book comes with our absolute passionate love to the institution of the Senate. We actually have a Senate. It's not very meaningful. Anna didn't mention it even in the election results for good reasons. It's mostly there because communists abolished Senate in 47, so we needed to bring it back. Not only do we want to make the Senate an absolutely central institution, we want to create Senates in all 16 of Polish provinces. So we just love Senate, and we love a particular kind of Senate. Keep in mind this very, very smart, wise quote from Elinor Ostrom that when it comes to institutions, details matter. And I think it's very important to understand what kind of Senate do we want to make up your own mind. You still may think that our idea is horrible, but at least please give me these 10 minutes to explain you what we really want to do. Our idea for the Senate comes from our love of European Union. And if you think about European Union, even though it has a European Parliament, in fact, it has a bicameral legislature. Because as all of you know, the two European councils, the European councils and the EU council, are de facto Senate. Yes, they are the legislative body. And they are a Senate which is made in a very unique way, not quite like yours, maybe a little similar, but the details matter, as Ostrom mentioned. The Senate, this legislative body, is made of chief executives, presidents and prime ministers, of the constituent units of this diverse entity that EU is. And we absolutely think it's a marvelous idea, partly by looking at the mistakes of your Senate, which is not like this, yes? So why do we love executive senators? Well, they are responsible for results. They are not professional legislators whose job is to grandstand and give flowery speeches. They need to bring concrete results to their communities. It's in many ways, being a senator is their second job, yes? They are continuous rather than term-bound, yes? The presidents and prime minister in the councils in the EU change gradually, which creates institutional memory, rules of mutuality, informal procedures that are very important for democratic stability. They are busy. That is good thing that it's their second job. And they need to do all this senatoring very, very quickly in those EU summits because it raises the importance of the role of experts and expert knowledge and also makes them more pragmatic. They also are a very efficient representation of diversity. What I mean by that is, you know, your Senate also represents the diversity, but there is a reason why we have prime ministers, why Luxembourg and Belgium have different prime ministers. Yes, there are some deep ideological, historical identity reasons why those chief executives exist as separate officials, yes, with separate governments, and putting them in this upper chamber of the legislature makes this diversity well represented. And finally, they are 500-pound gorillas. Yeah, they are really, really good in balancing the center, because of their day job, yes, because they have budget and governing power and all things that make them into chief executives. And when they come to Brussels to decide, they are, you know, they are a partner. They are not clients of the executive, which is the commission. They are the partners of the commission. So, you know, in your country, it would be like having a Senate made of governors instead of professional senators. And just like in the EU, we want them to strictly vote based on their population. Yes? So in normal matters, regional governors, which are called by a nice old Polish word, voivods. Yes, so the voivods, which are the governors, would vote based on their population. And we envision in the book that the voivods representing majority of the population will have it in terms of ordinary legislation. For things like independent institution, we propose a 60% population threshold. So you are already seeing the next step. We want to create a European Council in Poland. Yeah, we want to put the Polish Senate, make it into European Council so that it will have 16 voivods. As an option, we are saying, how about maybe making the biggest cities in Poland also separate regions, separate city-states like Vienna or Berlin. So then you may have maybe 20 of them, but it is going to be a small body of 500-pound gorillas, yes? And as I mentioned, we also want to create voivodeship senates, so regional senates in each of the provinces, predominantly to protect the cities, which are more liberal always, more progressive than the rest of the region. The cities in the southeast are much more conservative than cities in the northwest, but they are more progressive than the countryside in the southeast. So if you create a veto point in a voivodeship senate, when the mayor, remember it's population-based, so the mayor of the main city, let's say Rzeszów in southeast Poland, will not have the majority, but it will be the single largest vote in the Senate. This will protect the cities. Yes, so this is the proposal. So what are we doing here is we want to introduce or go back to the federalist promise, but without federalist mistakes. And when I say federalist mistakes, I look at you and your country and smile because we want a better Senate than your Senate. Yes, we want maybe introduce, city-states like Berlin, Hamburg, or Vienna. How about Austin becomes a city-state, or Houston? Yes, wouldn't that be great? Because indeed, with the very large cities, there is a difference between the region and the city, a palpable difference. And with the smaller ones, the voivodeship senate will be enough to provide. We want a strategic sectoral decentralization. Sectoral is Bruce Ackerman's, who is, a cautious fan. He wrote a very nice back cover praise of the proposal. We prefer to say strategic, but the idea is the same, which is that federalism is a historical phenomenon that because of historical power dependence created certain packages. Yes, we think that this needs to be, if you decentralize A, you also need to decentralize B, C, and D, just because US and Switzerland and Germany did it. Why? Yes, Poland is in a unique position when we have, relatively short democratic history. Institutions are malleable. We can have a second mover advantage and look at those packages and unpack them. So, for example, we don't want to, we say no decentralizing of electoral systems. We don't want conservative regions like in your country to create mini authoritarian states through gerrymandering. One unitary electoral commission for the whole country. We want unitary judiciary with some regional input, but with the same standards and the same ladder to one national Supreme Court, but especially the standards, professional standards. And yes, they will be applying vastly different laws, but lawyers can do this. Yes, it can happen. We don't want state police. Yes, we want violence, like physical violence, to stay with the unitary respected police force, because we don't want, again, the whole idea that probably you see among those three things is we want to keep all the regions competitive. Yeah? And we want as few shared mandates as possible. So that's another problem that you have. Yes, and finally, that is another lucky thing about being in Europe. We can fully decentralize income taxes. That's not going to bankrupt the state because in Europe the main source of governmental income is a value-added tax. So it creates a very neat fiscal distinction between income tax and the VAT. So these are reactions of some of the people inside and outside Poland. This is, we got a lot of praise from many smart people. We are very grateful for this. And now to conclude, I want to say that we don't even think this proposal is necessarily clashing with the Iron Broom. Because in many ways, your example shows that slow reckoning may not be the best way to move forward with reconciliation, because it gets you stuck in the past. There was a New York Times op-ed piece 2 days ago about the need for a rocket docket for Donald Trump. So even your commentators knowledgeable about your situation recognize it. So we actually think that this proposal can actually fit well with the quick reckoning. We smartly turn the page by making sure that people who were guilty of crimes are held accountable, but we give our compatriots from those conservative districts some vision for the joint future. And of course, it's a controversial future because it's a controversial compromise with people with views that are in many ways very, very objectionable. So we want to hear your opinion. Thank you so much.
And we would certainly put a lot of issues on the table. It sounds like a lawyer's dream. There are two different clocks ticking, I think, in Poland. One is the political clock, which is how do you liberate the institutions from the grip of the past? The other one is how do you design the institutions for the future? And one is measured in seconds, the other is measured in decades. And that will be the task for the politicians to align those two clocks. And unlike Greenwich, there is no central measuring device. So, but in any case, it's a very stimulating when it certainly provides, as you say, a vision, while the very tenuous recalibration occurs. I mean, we will see on the 12th whether that works. If it works, how many years will it take to liberate the institution from how they've been redesigned in the last 7 years? That's quite apart from the constitutional redesign, but both things will have to happen at the same time. Let's open it up for questions from the audience.
Thanks for a very interesting presentation. And let me just pick up on sort of Peter's, you mentioned sort of the, there's the political process and the political challenges, but then the process of institutional reform. And, just looking at this case and not knowing that much about Poland, but thinking about our own case in the United States. So for example, Levitsky and Ziblatt just came out with a new book that has, identified all the institutional problems that empower, autocratic minorities in the United States, and then a whole list of institutional reforms that would help to fix the problem and empower democratic majorities. And the pushback they're getting is, all right, but how do you get those institutional reforms if you have to work through the existing institutions to get them? And given the gridlock and the polarization that exists, how do you overcome that in order to introduce the institutional reforms? And so I guess the question I would pose to you all is sort of a similar one. How do you, if you have to work through existing institutions in order to bring about the reforms, recognizing that those institutions have been skewed or packed in certain ways since the PIS came to power in 2015. So what are the prospects for being able to do that without an overwhelming electoral majority that would allow you to really have full control over the institutions, which I don't think is the case. So how would you overcome those political challenges to introducing the institutional reforms?
So we believe that by far the best option, the one which we are advocating, would be to engage part of the conservative forces. And we have extensive contacts with them. And this is not only a number of public intellectuals, but we also talked to many politicians from Law and Justice, but also from Konfederacja, this far-right party. And I think it's no go for Jarosław Kaczyński because he's embedded in very centralized kind of thinking, and for him it's better to have nothing rather than to share some power. But in Law and Justice, there are politicians who are much more open to this kind of scenario. And what is important, Poland had two ways of decentralization of self-government reforms in 1990 and in 1999, and both of them were brought by the right. This is the heritage. Polish local governments and these kinds of institutions are the heritage of Polish conservative parties. So they are even in Law and Justice, there are politicians who have previously implemented these kinds of reforms. And furthermore, Polish local governments, they have much higher trust from the public, and you have politicians in local governments from all parties, and Law and Justice politicians are very much in favor of these kinds of solutions. And myself, I met many, they call themselves marshals of the voivodes, like governors. They are elected by the people, not nominated by the center, and they were very interested in this kind of solution. Of course, then Kaczyński learned about it and he said no, and then they were banned from talking with us. But you have to, when there is an opportunity, you have to be ready with a project. Yeah, so this is one option. But for us, it's the best because we believe that if you don't engage them, they will question the system. just like with the Constitution of 1997. So we very strongly emphasize it. And yesterday at Harvard, we had Radosław Sikorski, who is going to be a foreign affairs minister in 2 weeks. And we very strongly were pushing him to acknowledge that you cannot have a functioning system without engaging part of the right in it, and you cannot expect that the liberal side will win all the times. You need to have a system in which the other side will be able to win as well, and democracy will survive. Having said that, the other option is that parts of this project you can implement without changing the constitution as it is. So you can partly implement this kind of thinking in a lot of solutions and then test them and then perhaps convince the other side. Because yes, in order to change constitution, you need to have at least part support from the right.
To put it at a kind of higher comparative level, I think the comparison with the new Levitsky book shows how controversial this project is, because what they are basically saying, if I was an American conservative, I would say their book is a recipe how to stack the deck against us permanently so that we never win. We don't want to stack the deck against people who, you know, the political movement who did all those horrible things. That's the controversial part. We actually want to make an honest deal with them. Yes, because our strong view, and also comparatively speaking, our assessment of the situation is that it's much more demand-driven than political scientists want to admit, and that we are not going to create exactly as you say. It's simply a mission impossible to create an institutional setup if we, you know, consider institutions rules of the game and not part of the game itself, that the other part needs to be able to or willing to play that game under those institutions. So we basically, it's not that I am both of us are very progressive, but it's not that we particularly like our interlocutors from Law and Justice, but we simply don't think we have a choice. If you want to create institutions for a country like that, you need to make a deal with them, and we believe this is a more or less fair deal, where they need to give up, you know, their most radical and outrageous idea, because, for example, for them, even acknowledging the European Convention of Human Rights is a concession from their side. It's a huge concession, yes? So we need to understand in a kind of realist fashion that that this is the art of the possible, and that's the difference, which is why this is possible. And I think that Levitsky is not possible, yes, because this gives a concrete offer to the other side.
Thank you. So I want to take you up on the offer to think deeply about the costs. So in particular, two potential downsides, right? As you've just stated the case for the upside. But one downside is that instead of the kind of moderation that you're expecting from inclusion, that instead you get the kind of by legitimizing the right, and especially the far right, that you further embolden and empower and accept and make those ideas that are intolerable tolerable. The second is that although I really appreciate the decentralization does not need to be across everything. So no decentralized police, no decentralized levels of electoral process, etc. That you run the potential to create real deep pockets of subnational authoritarianism, where certain elements of the population, depending on their geographic placement, are completely marginalized, further targets of violence, as you've shown it, that happened at the national level. So if you can explain how you think those things could be protected against.
You want to? Oh, should I say this? Okay. Yeah. Well, so first of all, there is an observation that I mentioned, but maybe we need to reiterate that because mobilization in this winner-takes-all system is so important, the escalation and violence is simply much more of a winning strategy for the right-wing camp in the current system than under our proposal, because and you see it partly because you already have those regional governments. They don't have much power, but they exist. And 6 out of 16 are run by Law and Justice, and you simply see the difference in the way they govern. Yes, they don't govern the way I would like them to govern, but they respect court rules, they respect European Union mandates, and the national government did it. So we first of all need to understand that there is the winner-takes-all system actually incentivizes a lot of those abuses that we mentioned and that you are worried about. And then we can predict, as much as we can predict in institutional design, anything, that when we take those incentives away, there will be simply less reason for those governments. And we also have comparative examples. You know, this system is not unlike what Germany has, with Bavaria being very conservative. And yes, I mean, for my understanding, very progressive understanding of human rights, I think that things that happen in Bavaria are often forms of symbolic violence. But then comes the second part, the compare to what question. Yes, if we compare to Poland that is always run by Donald Tusk, yeah, that's a lousy deal for us, for human rights, for LGBT people. But that's not an available Poland. Yes, the available Poland is that we will have continuous back and forth, that those people will come back and we'll have all those incentives to be even more ruthless, even more discriminatory, even more marginalizing whenever they have another time in power, which you can also see by comparing how they govern in the first time, 2005, 2007, and how they govern now. So our argument to our progressive, and we have a lot of progressive co-authors who kind of in many ways took a personal risk signing up for a proposal like this. But our argument is simply, do we want to have a situation when maybe in the conservative regions there is just bare minimum civil unions which are mandated by the European Court of Human Rights, and in more progressive regions you will have full marriage equality, but you will have it for sure for a long run? Or do you have a dicey situation in which fundamental rights and fundamental legal framework can change overnight every 4 years? Yes, and we believe this system of those 2 second bests is better.
I guess I have a follow-up question to you, because you've talked a lot about a deal, and it's to a certain extent assuming that PIS will actually agree to it. However, A, looking at the fact that Kaczynski is unlikely to be willing to take this deal, and B, the fact that PiS is still speaking for the elderly population. The population is anti-LGBTQ, that is very religious. I don't necessarily see them being willing to accept this deal, even if we take away the concessions, even if we take away the incentives for them to be still unwilling. I think the citizens that vote for them, the religious aspects as well, are to a certain extent a pretty big barrier to entry or barrier to agreement for that specific deal.
So I think this deal is not particularly against religious people, and I don't see it generating many losers on this side. So on the contrary, I think that, unlike a lot of progressive public intellectuals, we have many contacts with right-wing public intellectuals and politicians, and the discovery is that they are as much afraid of us as we are afraid of them. And when you talk about now, let's say, progressive education coming to all schools in deeply conservative regions, and that's likely to happen because winner takes all. So I think that for them, rather than thinking about their children and grandchildren threatened by kind of education they are very much afraid of. This kind of deal in which the matters of everyday life can be governed closer to the citizens, I think it's protecting their rights. So I do not think it is generating a lot of losers on the side of the PIS electorate, but I think that yes, maybe someone like Jarosław Kaczyński with his vision of a centralized country, and we know very well where it comes from because he did his PhD under communism, and his PhD supervisor was a theoretician of a centralized state. He was a fan of Carl Schmitt. So we know where it comes from. These are deep intellectual origins, yes? So he left communist kind of centralism and Schmittian state. These were things which were, but you know, he's not with us forever. And there are other elements of law and justice. And what is also with this iron broom is that this very radical part of law and justice also violated constitution, they violated law. So in this book, there is a chapter about a new round table that perhaps now they haven't yet gave the power, but if they see that, I don't know, they are threatened by the prosecutor, by the state tribunal, which is more unlikely, yes, maybe there will be some willingness to negotiate, yes, and find a common solution.
That's exactly why, as I mentioned on the last slide, while being, you know, the faces of reconciliation, even before it was popular because of Tusk's inclusion in his first plan, we actually are quite enthusiastic about iron broom. You can see very strong rational choice influences on this proposal, and we simply think if the alternative becomes worse to the other side, they may want to negotiate. There is a bigger incentive to negotiate. Yeah.
So Kaczynski won't be forever, but we have a politician here who's 82 years old and wants to be holding power when he's 86. Kaczynski is in his early 70s. So that's another 15 years to go if he is in reasonably good health, as he seems to be. But the electoral cycle is 4 years. How do you align his strategy of saying, I'm going to sit out the 4 years and I'll go for an electoral mobilization strategy and see whether I gain it again?
So my argument would be that for a constitutional change, we need 1/4 of Kaczynski's MPs. And just like it's our granular knowledge of the system that we believe it's possible.
I see. You think you can split the move?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that clarifies it. Good. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming. So I have two questions, if that's okay. So you mentioned Mark Brzezinski, a US diplomat who told somebody not to show Warner Bros.
Polish president to veto the bill which would close major and only opposition TV channel.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank
He's
you.
an ambassador.
Okay, a US ambassador to.
Yes, Mark Brzezinski, the ambassador, yes.
Son of Zbigniew Brzezinski.
And my second question is, on one of your slides, you put forth your proposal as a federalist promise without federalist mistakes. That's a pretty bold and confident claim. My question to you is, well, obviously no system is perfect. What flaws might you foresee that can come forward with time?
For our proposal.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I mean, of course, we are, you know, it's a pretty bold statement to write a book proposing new constitutional deal for your country. So that already self-selects people who are pretty, you know, confident, I guess. a proposal like this has literally not been offered since 1997, so of any kind, any direction. Well, I mean, I think the biggest worry is that it's a very competitive system, and we see some instances of lousy progressive governance, yes, and in that system, the cost will be dear, yes, if you will need to be always on your toes, both to because we are confident that the system will be competitive, even in conservative districts. That's the details matter, and we design these details, and we, I mean, I think our US background also, and the recent great book by Grunberg, yes, Princeton University Press, on my read of it, basically puts most of the blame for the pathologies of your federalism on the electoral system, on simply authoritarian and democratic and competitive electoral rules within states. So we were very careful not to go this way, but that means that potentially the conservatives, and that's partly what they hope for, we are mostly having the optimistic conservatives who think we can capture a lot of conservative districts if they are competitive with time, with those generational changes, but they think the same. And that's, of course, the promise of the system that makes the deal possible, that both sides see an upside. But, while I am very optimistic progressive, I think that progressives will need to be very, very careful not to get overconfident in this system, because if you lose a landslide, let's say, in those regional elections, then you have a problem, yes? So I think that's the biggest worry.
Really?
Thanks. I wanted to follow up on the part of Rachel's question, where she suggested decentralization doesn't have to happen across the board, and too much of it can create pockets of subnational authoritarianism. But I wanted to sort of ask the flip side, and maybe it also follows up on this question, why the election system, which I think you just began to answer, but the judiciary and law enforcement, why those were the right institutions in your mind in which to sustain the unitary tendencies of the current system, and what were the key protections to those unitary institutions being captured or misused by a leader with authoritarian tendencies down the line?
Why not taxes?
Hmm?
And why not taxes?
Oh, yes. I mean, I guess we are very much intellectual disciples of Adam Przeworski, and we think that the competitive nature of electoral system is really the definitional feature of democracy. So all those institutions tied to the competitive aspect, yes, the fact that we want to keep all those regions competitive, and now the protection would be the National Senate, yes, and the supermajority in the National Senate. Because one nice thing about this is that those governors, conservative and progressives, can differ in a lot of things, on a lot of policies, but they will be united on one thing, which is we need to keep the system, free from abuse from the center, but also even-handed between us, because, otherwise, it can be one time it will be good for us, the other times will be good for them. So we believe the supermajority in the Senate, barring for the risk that I acknowledge, which is some unexpected complete collapse of the progressives in the regions, which we can also maybe dampen this risk by having a German model in which regional elections are not yet all at once. I think this is a very good idea. You will have an interest in the Senate to keep those institutions impartial. So this is again not assuming as many of what we are describing. It's not assuming patriotism or well intentions. Try to create a system where the rational self-interest will get us. Not to my ideal world. I would want centrally progressive Poland, but at least to a functioning democracy.
So first of all, thank you so much for such a fascinating presentation. I basically have two questions. First of all, the first one is for Anna. You've mentioned that the law and Sprawiedliwość is trying to create the majority in the parliament, but it's failing. But I wanted to ask, what are the prospects of the majority? What are like possible variants that can happen? Which party will have like the most power within it? And the second question is for Maciej. You've mentioned and you've put this map of the region, and there is clearly a sort of territorial division. So I wanted to ask, like, what circumstances caused that one part of the country is conservative, second one is more pro-EU? So, like, what's the reasons for it? Thank you.
So the future for the majority is quite clear. There is a clear majority, which is the Civic Platform, the People's Party, and the Christian Democrats, and the left. And they, from the beginning, they say they want to form a government together, but the president is slowing it down. So the situation is clear, but the president is not helping them. But on the 13th of December, this should happen. So the answer is very easy. This was too much, but I may start. So for the origins of this, so there are of course different hypotheses. Why is that? So first of all, Poland was in 19th century under different partitions, and it was under the rule of different European powers, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and Germany. So there might be something into it, and also in different parts of Poland, the peasants got liberty in different moments, which also was a very important social transformation. And we don't have a map, but also after World War II, Polish borders changed. Yes, we were moved to the west, and the population from former east was transferred to the west, northwest, and north-south. And they kind of, from these territories where perhaps it would be much more conservative because it was transferred, it became much more progressive. So we don't know because we don't have an alternative reality. But 2 days ago, during the dinner with Radosław Markowski, one of the great Polish political scientists, we were discussing that if these borders were not changed, law and justice would win all the time. Because if the population would stay in the east, in those with really very rooted rural culture, perhaps it would remain very conservative. But the fact that they had to move and that they were meeting with other people, this very strongly changed, made them much more progressive. So there are a lot of hypotheses. We don't have time. It's a topic for a big book. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question. Thank you very much for this really fascinating talk. I'm going to sort of go to the beginning of your talk. And one of the things that struck me also in comparison to other European countries at the moment, and even the United States actually, is this kind of it almost seems like there's a demographic determinism in Poland, because the figures, I mean, the age curve, the older you get, clearly the more injustice you are. And of course, there's the regional divide. And one of the things I was wondering, I mean, the institutions are obviously important, but you still have to have people wanting to play within those institutions. And that's where the age thing comes in. What I'm wondering is, how does that, I mean, is the population of younger people who are more likely to vote for the non-law justice, are they situated in that west part of the country, or are there any in this rural area that may change as the people die off in the rural area, or in the, I mean, how embedded, I guess, is that rural culture? Is it something that's likely to shrink? Or,
yes.
Yeah, how do the social factors actually play?
Basically, the one important pattern is that the rural areas are depopulating.
Okay.
And the urban areas are getting growing, but we didn't have time to discuss everything. But in the electoral law, the parliament must adjust the system when the population changes, and Law and Justice didn't do that. Actually, Law and Justice got perhaps 8 or 10 seats more than it should get, because the population, this mandate, this distribution of seats was not adjusted for 15 or 16 years. Even Civic Platform, sometimes liberals are really doing bad job, because Civic Platform didn't do it as well 8 years ago or 9 years ago. So it's for, I think, more than 15 years hasn't been adjusted. So it's very inadequate, and it's privileging rural parties. So I hope this is one of the things new parliament will do, because it's not their decision. They should do it automatically, but it didn't happen. So I think there are definitely much more young people in more urbanized areas than in the
Which are northwest.
Well, that was your map, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you both. 2 questions. The first is very quick. Is that edited volume only available in Polish?
For now, yes.
Okay.
We are working on thinking about an English version. Somehow it may be inversely correlated with the impact it will be having in Poland, because if we have time working on an English edition, maybe we are less busy with like changing Poland.
The second question has to do with this polarization is the main issue, let's say, and it goes way back in time. I'm thinking, what has been the role of education and policies in education in, it often happens that story is told in a very specific way, manipulated. Other topics are banned from being spoken in the school. And I was wondering if this is dealt with in the edited volume, or what's the plan? What the role will be of education in this, in moving forward.
So I just about education, I have something which is I think striking. So I analyzed the data about the matura, baccalaureate. This is
High school exam.
High school exam, and in Poland, the best results in high school exam comes from southeast, the most conservative region. They get the best results for years, because they have very strong communities which care about children. There is very little kind of early school leavers. These kinds of things, they don't happen. So it's not necessarily, in Polish case shows that it's not bad education which is producing conservative society. We have very good education in very conservative regions. And actually we believe in this book, we think that the schooling system is one of the very important levers for the politicians to mobilize and demobilize and so on. So we believe that more things should be decided closer to the parents, to the local communities, that we could have much more progressive school in Northwest, and it could stay very conservative in the Southeast. And still there's a lot in curricula about which they could agree, those different regions, but there's much more which could be decided on the local level, not in Warsaw, because for now we are fighting with curriculum. Every new government is new curriculum. So we don't think it's serving Polish school, because things which work well, we don't have time to discuss it, were completely destroyed by this government, and which were good for children from the countryside, which gave them more educational opportunities. Those things were erased really by the government which was elected by those parents. Yes, so we were experimenting every 4 or 8 years, building new institutions in education and then destroying them, regardless if they work or not.
And very short addition. I mean, Poland, from what Anna just said, is like your main case that school wars are futile, because we had total centralized progressive control over the school for 2 decades, before in a way too, because communists were progressive on most of those topics, yes. And yet these divisions, flourish, yes? So we don't believe that decentralizing will increase the polarization or reproduce the polarization, because it's mobilizing against the centrally introduced schools that is making people more radicalized. That's what the data shows and the history shows.
And those young people who didn't vote for law and justice went through 8 years of propaganda, of incredible right-wing propaganda. And they are not voting for the right at all.
Last question.
You very quickly on that. I think those students who just got out of their high schools that voted against peace, I think we're living through the educational change. So like getting rid of gymnasium, getting rid of middle schools, and getting high schools, and the entire state of that word showed that it was. So I think, do you think that could have been a difference and that could have been an impact that doesn't necessarily work for people who are now into that system and haven't known the system that was previously, so middle school, high school?
That's part of the story, but of course, our hope as progressives going into this deal is we will govern better. In a competitive system, we progressives will eventually win, but not by imposing it by force, centralized force, but simply governing better and step by step, lowering this number of those conservative districts. Some electoral surveys now suggest that the number of districts governed by peace, there will be a local election in April, may be cut by half to 3. Yes, so of course, everybody matters. And of course, there is a cost to this. But if you are hopeful that our ideas are genuinely better for the people, then having a competitive system in which no region will be by default conservative is a huge chance for us, yes?
Well, this has been fascinating. I remember talking to Anna about this in Warsaw some years ago, and I said, Anna, you're dreaming big. And what I find most interesting about it is this combination of Tocqueville from the bottom up and rational institutional design and German staats theory from the top down. That is a very rare thing to put together. And if in fact it makes it possible to peel off